Last time we talked about Rachel's arguments in favor of euthanasia. This time we're going to think about Tollefsen's arguments against euthanasia. And Tollefsen raises his point in the context of a particular sort of perspective where he says, well, hey, suppose, or let's just assume that euthanasia will someday be legal, right? There's this other moral question of should we actually actively choose it, right? Is it something that I myself should choose or something you should choose? And as part of addressing that question, he necessarily raises arguments that address the more fundamental question of whether it should be legal in the first place or not. Right? So Tollefsen's arguing against, and he gives sort of two general approaches to the question. Right? The first approach is the fundamental approach, the basic fundamental theoretical ideas that ground the question, and then secondly, he gives some more pragmatic approaches that have to do more with the practical realities of euthanasia and what it would do to our society. So let's consider first his fundamental argument. Tollefsen's of the view that human life is a basic good. By this, he means it's the sort of thing which is good for its own sake, and that you can't really answer the question, why is it good, right? You can't really explain what it's good for. You can't explain its goodness in terms of something more basic. It's just fundamentally good. It's a basic good, right? It's the sort of thing that we just grasp as good if you understand, excuse me, if you understand what Tollefsen says, then, my goodness. Okay, I think I'm done now. If you understand what life is, Tollefsen says, then you just understand that it's good, right? By knowing life intimately, you know that it's good. A comparison is something like friendship, which is another thing that he takes to be a fundamental basic good, right? You don't really have to explain why friendship's good, right? You just know that it's good. And how do you know that it's good? You come to know that it's good through becoming acquainted with friends, right? How have you come to know that friendship is good? By having friends, right? You learn that friendship is good when you're young. That understanding of what friendship is changes and shifts over time. But really, it's something that you know. If you understand what friendship is, then you understand that it's good, right? Okay, friendship is also good for its own sake, just like life is a basic good that's good for its own sake. Those things are true. Well, he says that we should never intentionally act against a basic good. Let's start with friendship here to sort of draw the analogy. So friendship is a basic good, and Tollefsen thinks that it is always immoral to directly, intentionally act against your friendship, right? This probably is true, right? If you sincerely have a friend, it would be wrong of you to actively work against your friendship, right? Now, it's one thing to sort of let the friendship fall by the wayside. That's not actively working against your friendship. It's another thing to say, hey, this person's not actually good for me, and so I need to not spend time with them. Again, Tollefsen would say that wasn't really a friendship in the first place, right? If they're not good for you, then it wasn't really friendship. It was some sort of other form of human relationship, right? Friendship is the sort of thing that you should never intentionally directly act against, right? You shouldn't necessarily, it would be wrong of you to call up your friends right now and call them all assholes for the purpose of getting them to end the friendships that you have with them, right? That would be bad. Ethically, morally bad, Tollefsen says. He says the same thing about life, right? Just like it would never be okay to intentionally act against the basic good of friendship, Tollefsen thinks it's never okay to intentionally act against the basic good of human life, right? And so as part of that, he thinks it would be wrong for you to choose euthanasia for yourself, and arguably, by extension, for our society to allow people to choose euthanasia, right? Because it's a basic fundamental good, and we should never act directly against these basic fundamental human goods. Okay? So that's his fundamental argument. That's the more basic theoretical point. He thinks that's why euthanasia is not something good. Because life is good, euthanasia acts directly against it, and so we just shouldn't engage in that, right? Okay. But he also gives these more pragmatic arguments. These pragmatic arguments more have to do with what practically, the practical effects of euthanasia, of choosing euthanasia yourself or having it in our society, the practical effects or other sorts of considerations worth considering. So these are the pragmatic points. And he makes two pragmatic arguments. One of them is about the nature of medicine. He says if you look back on the history of medicine throughout the years, it's evolved in a particular sort of way, right? And the idea is that they've always been, doctors, nurses, etc., healthcare professionals have always been ordered towards life and healing, right? Always, there's this assumption that if you see a doctor, if you see a healthcare professional, they're going to be trying to make you healthy, trying to help you to continue to live, trying to fix you, right? That is the goal of medicine, that it's always been the goal of medicine. And Tollefsen says it's not incidental, it's not accidental. It didn't just happen that way. He thinks it's been an intentional choice on the part of medicine, people in the practice of medicine, to make sure that it's always ordered towards life and healing, right? Why is this the case? Well, because medicine has a strong power dynamic. Right? When you meet with a doctor, they hold basically all of the power, right? More or less, right? If they tell you that you need to do something, you're going to do it, right? If they tell you that something's bad, you're going to believe that it's bad, right? Your doctor's opinion and your personal doctor's opinion holds huge sway over you. Indeed, this has been shown, I believe, in several research studies that personal doctors, individual physicians, play a big role in people's understandings of things, right? And so it's been important that they've always been ordered towards life and healing because this allows us to trust them. We can trust that when they give us advice, they're doing it for the sake of helping our life, healing us, making us better, etc., right? Now, the worry is that if you introduce euthanasia into this relationship here, now you're worried that they might be choosing against your life, against your healing, that they're going to go against this basic fundamental point in medicine, which is that doctors should always be ordered towards life, always should be ordered towards healing, and that if you bring in euthanasia, they're going to be sort of ordered towards death at that point, right? And so you can no longer trust that every time you talk to your doctor, they're always going to be aiming at life and healing, because sometimes they might be aiming at death, right? Okay, that's one of his pragmatic concerns. The other one is we have an injunction, a societal injunction, a societal rule. It's also a law. It says don't intentionally kill people. Right? This is why we don't allow murder, for example, because we have this societal rule and indeed an actual law in place that says we shouldn't intentionally kill people, right? And this is a societal law that has served us. It's worth noting, we do, of course, make some exceptions in the case of the common good, right? So, like killing in war, for example, there's no injunction against that. But that's because we assume that it's better for the entire society when killing happens in those cases. But generally, we say we don't kill people. You just don't intentionally kill people. Why? Well, by having this broad rule, right, it helps to ensure our own safety over the course of our life, right? Because if we didn't have this broad societal rule that said don't intentionally kill people, then, there might be cases where you're like, well, so-and-so looked like maybe they were going to do something bad, and so I had to kill them. It's like, well, no, we shouldn't intentionally kill people unless it's absolutely necessary. This rule has helped keep us safe. It's helped our children stay safe. It's helped our friends stay safe, our parents, our cousins, our friends. All of these people have stayed safe in large part because of this rule, right? Not only because of this rule, but this rule has played this important role that's benefited us through the years. And Tollefsen basically says it would be a poor service to that rule if your last action as a living person were to act directly against that rule, right? And euthanasia acts directly against that rule, right? And basically, his idea is something like this. Even if you have to suffer a little bit, even if you have to sacrifice in order to make sure that this rule continues and that our society continues to have this rule and respect this sort of rule, then that's worth it, right? That's a sacrifice you should be willing to pay for the good of the society that benefited you for your whole life, right? And so with your last action, why would you undercut the rules that have been good for you, that have served you well, right? Why not help to maintain the thing that you thought, that you think was good and did in fact perhaps serve you well? Okay, so those are his two sort of pragmatic points. So the fundamental point, life is this basic good, and these two pragmatic points. All of these points suggest that even if euthanasia were legal, we shouldn't personally choose it. But they also have this broader implication, which suggests that as a society, we shouldn't allow it in the first place, right? And indeed that it would be better if we did not. Okay, that's Tollefsen against euthanasia. Please do not forget about your first exam, which will be due just with everything else this week by Sunday night at 10 p.m. That's June 20th at 10 p.m. I think that's all. Until next time.